Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Element and Architecture podcast. And in this episode, instead of exploring one specific architecture, we'll be exploring a general architectural style that was prominent in China in the latter half of the 20th century. So this episode is actually inspired by my peers' work on JianZiLou. The research that they have done inspired me to make this episode today because I really found the architectural style to be not just an architectural style, but also a social phenomenon. Now, the architectural style that we will be exploring today, or not architectural style, but rather an architectural model to be more precise, that we'll be exploring today is the JianZiLou, which is a unique architectural model that emerged primarily in Beijing during the 20th century. It stands as a testament to China's efforts at the time to address urban housing needs in a period of economic constraints. Born out of necessity during the post-cultural revolution era, JianZiLou architectural style is a product of its parent architectural styles. That is, the Soviet Union architectural styles that was popular at that time, and the traditional Chinese architectural style. To this day, the JianZiLou serves as a fusion between these architectural style unique to that time period and also unique to the two societies. These structures not only reflect the socio-economic conditions of their time, but also the adaptability of architecture through different societal conditions. As time passes, the JianZiLou will gradually manifest itself as the intersection of architecture, communal philosophies, and a period of struggle in Chinese history that is gradually being forgotten by the future generation. The JianZiLou emerged in the 1970s, right after the Cultural Revolution. A series of mishandled policies during the Cultural Revolution caused China to endure a period that was economically underdeveloped and characterized by a poor standard of living for the majority of the population. During this time, the country focused almost all its efforts on economic recovery, leading to extremely limited resources. To address the housing needs of the growing population of laborers under such tight resource constraints, this economical and practical architectural model, known as the JianZiLou, was developed as a cost-efficient solution to this tight resource condition. The most noticeable feature, the most distinctive feature of JianZiLou is in its structure, specifically its long exposed corridor running across the facade of the building that connects multiple individual apartment units. Both ends of the corridor/balcony are open, which gives it the appearance of a tube, hence getting its name JianZiLou, or the tube building. In other words, the architecture looks as if it's formed by a sequence or repetition of units, where each level and balcony of the multi-storied architecture sort of forms its own unit of communal area. The clarity of the architecture's communal area is enhanced by the open corridor running across the perimeter of the architecture. The emphasis on the idea of communal units aggregate in a single structure is a clear influence from the Khrushchev buildings, or also known informally or colloquially as the commie blocks, developed in Soviet Russia in the 1960s that had similar units of communal areas aggregate in a single structure. Furthermore, JianZiLou, like the Khrushchev blocks, are constructed with concrete, which is a material that can be produced on a mass industrial scale, making it a very cost-efficient option for these housing units as a material. However, despite these clear indications of Soviet influence on its structure, the appearance of JianZiLou integrate elements that are really unique to traditional Chinese architecture. The roof incorporates, for example, the traditional Chinese overhanging gable roofs, also known as the xuanshanding, which is a roof style that is characteristic of traditional Chinese architecture and is characterized by the slopes they have. Well, there are many different types of the gable roofs, but when one aspect you can see in common with the different types of gable roofs is the slope in them. And so this roof style is common across the different models of the JianZiLou. Furthermore, on the interiors, doors, windows, and stair railings, they're made of wood, and ornaments with the use of lattice windows are deployed, which reflects the traditional Chinese ornamentations common in authentic Chinese culture architecture. Hence, we sort of see the fusion of influence between the Soviet and Chinese architecture. And this fusion reflects the broader sociological status of China at the time. There is both a dominating preference towards socialist and communist ideologies pioneered by the Soviets. And there's also at the same time the need to embrace traditional Chinese culture that is widely supported by the Chinese population at the time. That is the mindset that is communicated by the building, by the JianZiLou we see. Talking about the interior, inside JianZiLou, there is a compact layout with large amount of communal or shared spaces. The interior layout is actually demonstrates the communist influence that was dominating China at the time. For example, the public bathrooms, the communal kitchens are common in JianZiLou. And although some units allocated to the higher ranking individuals had private kitchens, most JianZiLou only had communal kitchens that are hosted in the corridors. The abundance of communal spaces emphasizes and even reflects a sense of community, and arguably at a cost of material welfare, since often these spaces gets too crowded and conditions gets too lamentable. At the time, JianZiLou was seen as an economic housing solution. The close-knit community atmosphere, as many neighbors work in the same unit, fostered strong human connections and high resident satisfactions. In fact, in between the different apartment units, the different rooms, the different families forms a strong bond as a result of the way the architecture is designed with the interconnected balconies. So we can see how the way the architecture is designed leaves an impact on the way individuals living in these residential units interact with each other. So we sort of see how this architectural style fosters human interaction between families. And although we can say that it really fosters strong human connections, the reality of these buildings is that they're quite debatable from a material standpoint. However, in recent years, with the rapid economic development and improvements in standards of living that China is facing as it gradually embraces capitalist ideologies, the JianZiLou can no longer meet the needs of the modern-day demographic. So most residents have moved to newly built commercial housing. Originally, JianZiLou housed two main demographics: rural youth assigned to urban jobs, and also rural workers employed in urban factories. While JianZiLou provided affordable housing at the time, it became less popular with improving standards of living due to its small spaces and excessive public or communal areas for young people under a context that is gradually adopting the sense of individuality and less on the sense of community. So imagine under today's world, right? Highly individualistic society. Do you think that as a young man, as a young person, you would want to live in these small confined spaces where there's barely any private space, but a lot of shared space? No, of course not. You wouldn't want to live there. And this is why the unfortunate reality is that the remaining JianZiLou buildings are now mostly vacant or occupied by economically disadvantaged migrant workers or older people that lost the ability to maintain their income. And these buildings are basically getting neglected under the modern context. Many, in fact, have been demolished, and more will due to its vacancy and its lack of demand in general. Despite its conditions, JianZiLou remains as culturally and historically significant, I would say, in Beijing's urban identity. So there is, I would say, definitely a need to revitalize them. For JianZiLou to regain relevance, it needs to address its shortcomings and its conditions. The residents of these buildings suggest that various aspects, such as these small spaces, make the living conditions in JianZiLou very much sort of lamentable. For example, some units lack private bathrooms, or some units lack communal kitchens, and these leads to problems such as these leads to interpersonal and hygienic problems for people, and also the communal kitchens with the poor ventilation is also especially undesirable in today's world. So general improvements to the conditions of the current JianZiLou with the retained overall design, the architectural model, is definitely the preferred way to revitalize these abandoned JianZiLou buildings. The JianZiLou stands as a remarkable example of architectural adaptation and cultural synthesis, which reflects the undesirable socioeconomic conditions of the 1970s Beijing or China in general. Its distinctive unit sequence and ornamental elements demonstrate a thoughtful blend of sort of Soviet modernist and traditional Chinese design elements. While primarily a response to housing shortages of the time, the JianZiLou also fostered a strong sense of community through its shared spaces. As modern Beijing continues to evolve in terms of its urban landscape, the JianZiLou offers valuable insight into the city's architectural heritage and its architectural history, and progress definitely needs to be made to ensure that this essential part of the city's identity remains in our modernizing world. Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. And I really thank my peer for introducing their research to me, because it really allowed me to see this architecture from the lens of the socio-economic landscape at the time. And I found their research to be very, very inspiring for me. And so, yeah, this is definitely an interesting episode, I would say. First episode about an architectural style instead of one specific architecture. So pretty interesting. And I will see you guys in the next episode.